Now, here's why Bank of America is a complete scumbag company. By making it a requirement to apply for the Paycheck Protection Program, that a small business either have a credit card with Bank of America or be in debt with the bank, Bank of America was favoring small businesses that owed them money. Hello everyone, I've got 3 topics I'm going to cover today. The first is Bank of America is exploiting the coronavirus by corruptly administering the Paycheck Protection Program. Secondly, I'm going to talk about how the unhinged rant by CNN anchor Chris Cuomo has turned into a full-blown scandal at this point. Finally, I'm going to talk about the effect the coronavirus has had on the price of street drugs like methamphetamine and fentanyl. So let's start with Bank of America. For those that are unfamiliar, when Congress passed the economic stimulus in response to the coronavirus, included in that bill was a program called the Paycheck Protection Program. The Paycheck Protection Program was a government bailout of small businesses. If you owned a small business that employed people, you could apply for a loan under the program. You could then use the loan proceeds to pay your employees. As long as you used the loan to pay your employees and you didn't fire them during the government shutdown, then your loan would be forgiven. The architect behind the Paycheck Protection Program was Senator Marco Rubio. Millions of small business owners saw this program as a lifeline, as a way to make it through the crisis, as a way to avoid having to fire their employees. Now, this program had a couple of important requirements. First of all, in order to apply for a loan under the program, you had to apply through a bank. You couldn't just go directly to the Small Business Administration and request a loan. Secondly, in order to qualify for a loan from the Paycheck Protection Program, you had to have a pre-existing relationship with a banking institution. So if you owned a small business and you did your banking through Bank of America, let's say, then you would be required to apply through the loan through Bank of America, unless you happen to do business with any other banks. Now, I'm pretty uniquely informed on this particular story because I happen to be a small business owner. Yes, I work for the government full-time, but my wife and I also own a small business. We have one employee who works for us. Since the coronavirus has hit, our business has been way down because people are in lockdown, and we didn't want to have to fire our employee. So we wanted to apply for the Paycheck Protection Program. Luckily, we met the requirements set by the program. We had a pre-existing business checking account with Bank of America. It was opened over a year ago, which more than qualifies with the requirements of the Paycheck Protection Program. So on the first day that you could apply for loans through the Paycheck Protection Program, my wife and I, like thousands of other small business owners, woke up early and tried to apply through the program through Bank of America's website. When we did this, however, we were told we don't qualify for loans through the Paycheck Protection Program because we didn't have any debt to Bank of America. We didn't have a credit card with Bank of America. Of course, this didn't make any sense. No requirements of the Paycheck Protection Program required a business to be in debt or to have a credit card with the bank. Small business owners who banked with Bank of America quickly began to complain over Twitter. In response to all of these tweets, Marco Rubio confirmed that this was not a requirement. He demanded that Bank of America change its application process and indicated that its activities were in violation of Paycheck Protection Program requirements. Bank of America was acting illegally by adding its own requirements to the application. Just a few hours after small business owners could start applying for these loans, Bank of America's CEO was interviewed by the media outlet The Street. He told The Street that Bank of America was no longer requiring its customers to have a credit card or debt to Bank of America in order to apply for a loan through the Paycheck Protection Program. This, of course, was a lie. And I know it's a lie because I personally read this article less than an hour after it was posted online. I then proceeded to Bank of America's website and tried to apply for a loan for the Paycheck Protection Program, only to be told that I needed to have a credit card with Bank of America. It wasn't until 2 days later that Bank of America's website finally removed the requirement that you be in debt with Bank of America or have a credit card with them in order to apply for a loan. So when that requirement was removed, my wife and I, along with thousands of other small business owners, finally were able to apply for a loan through the Paycheck Protection Program. So everything's good now, right? No, because yesterday my wife and I, along with thousands of other small business owners, received an email from Bank of America indicating that they would not process our loans because all of the money for the Paycheck Protection Program had run out. Now, here's why Bank of America is a complete scumbag company. By making it a requirement to apply for the Paycheck Protection Program, that a small business either have a credit card with Bank of America or be in debt with the bank, Bank of America was favoring small businesses that owed them money. Now, the requirements of the Paycheck Protection Program requires the loan money to be used to pay employees. But businesses who receive money through the Paycheck Protection Program are more likely to survive, more likely to be able to pay their debts because they're now alleviated of the burden of having to pay their employees. They can use the loan proceeds to pay their employees, thus freeing up cash flow elsewhere. The implications of this is that scumbag Bank of America employees had to have had some meeting about the Paycheck Protection Program where they discussed ways that they could use the program to maximize their own profits. Rather than administrate these loans fairly, Bank of America would funnel all of the paycheck protection money towards clients who owed them money. This would of course ensure the optimal amount of paycheck protection loan money would end up reinvested back into Bank of America. The fact that such a huge and wealthy institution like Bank of America would exploit struggling small businesses in this way is absolutely outrageous. Bank of America ought to be criminally investigated at this point. And if that doesn't happen, I personally will be exploring the possibility of a class action lawsuit. The idea that my wife and I's business has to fail because we didn't owe money to Bank of America, therefore our employee has to get fired, is absolutely insane. Anyways, moving on, the second thing I wanted to talk about is actually an update to my video a few days ago. If you recall that video, a few days ago, I talked about how CNN news anchor Chris Cuomo went on a bizarre rant on his satellite news radio show. During this rant, he talked about how he was confronted on Easter Sunday by a fat biker, and that he desperately wished he could have told that biker to go to hell. Chris Cuomo felt that he couldn't respond to the biker in this way because of his celebrity status with CNN. He then expressed sentiments that he hated his job, that he felt like he provided no value through his reporting at CNN. Now, when I first brought this up, it was just a funny story that Chris Cuomo would say all of these things in a bizarre rant. But it's since become a huge scandal. And that's because we now know the other side of the story. The fat tire biker described in Chris Cuomo's rant has filed a police report. According to the police report, the bicyclist encountered Chris Cuomo while Chris Cuomo and his family were at an empty residential plot. This was apparently a property that Chris Cuomo owned in the Hamptons where a house was planned to have been built, but it hadn't been built yet. So it's just an empty residential property. Upon riding by the area, the bicyclist was surprised to see Chris Cuomo. The reason that he was surprised is that Chris Cuomo on CNN had reportedly had the coronavirus. Less than a day prior to this encounter, CNN Dr. Sanjay Gupta reported that Chris Cuomo was under quarantine and that he wasn't allowed to leave his house. So when this bicyclist saw Chris Cuomo out there, surrounded by his family members, he was surprised. So he asked Chris Cuomo, "Why are you here? Aren't you supposed to be in quarantine for having the coronavirus?" This is where things start to get really bizarre. When Chris Cuomo went on this insane rant during his satellite radio program, he acted like this bicyclist had insulted him. You know, like the guy in the viral video who called him Fredo. My interpretation of what happened is that this bicyclist was a Trump supporter, that he mocked or made fun of Chris Cuomo for working at CNN. But that appears not to be true. So why was Chris Cuomo so angry? Why was he so mad at this guy and wanted to tell him to go to hell? Well, why was Chris Cuomo not in quarantine? CNN reported less than a day earlier that he was required to be in quarantine due to having the coronavirus. So there are only a couple possibilities here, none of which reflect very well on either Chris Cuomo or CNN. One possibility is that CNN's reporting was nonsense. Either Chris Cuomo never had the coronavirus, or he had recovered from the coronavirus and they were acting like he was still inflicted with the disease. Both of these possibilities mean that CNN was exploiting the coronavirus for ratings and reporting fake news. The other possibility is that Chris Cuomo was indeed afflicted with the coronavirus, that he was told to self-quarantine, and despite that, he exposed his own family as well as other people to the virus by traveling to this residential lot in the Hamptons. And before anyone concludes that this is some sort of political conspiracy, the bicyclist told the police department that he did not want to press charges against Chris Cuomo. He indicated that he was a Democrat who watched CNN, and the only reason he filed the police report is because he was afraid that some sort of retaliation would happen against him. He therefore wanted to create a public record of what had happened. If this all were not bizarre enough, Chris Cuomo is now denying that he ever made any of these statements during the rant. He's denying that he said that he believes he provides no value, that he hates the job, that he talked about having this encounter with the fat tire bicyclist. Here's the problem, Chris. That wasn't a private conversation. You broadcast that over the radio. You can't then credibly deny that you said these things. Thousands of people heard them. They were recorded. So why is Chris Cuomo lying about all of this? Why is he denying that he said these things all of a sudden? And the reason, of course, is that there's some larger scandal at issue here. Either Chris Cuomo never had the coronavirus, or he exaggerated his affliction with it for television ratings, or he deliberately broke quarantine and put his family and other people at risk of getting the disease. Like I said earlier, none of these possibilities reflect very well on CNN or Chris Cuomo. Now, the final thing I wanted to talk about is the effect that the coronavirus pandemic has had on the price of illegal street drugs. Early last year, street drugs such as methamphetamine had hit the lowest price on record, with one hit of methamphetamine retailing for around $3. So you could get high off crystal meth for slightly more than it would cost for a tall boy of beer. However, in the recent couple of weeks, the price of illegal drugs has skyrocketed, with the price of drugs like methamphetamine and fentanyl tripling. The reason for this is twofold. First of all, in order to manufacture drugs like methamphetamine or fentanyl, the Mexican drug cartels have to order raw materials from China, things such as acetone, and those supply chains have been disrupted due to the virus. This means the Mexican drug cartels have not been able to manufacture nearly as many drugs. Additionally, there are new limits on what traffic is allowed into the United States from Mexico. Reduced traffic means that border guards at the ports of entry are able to apply more scrutiny to every single vehicle that enters the United States. The combination of these factors has caused the cost of illegal drugs to skyrocket. Now, I think there are two important conclusions that we can draw from this. The first conclusion is that when it comes to drugs entering the United States, Mexico tends to bear the brunt of all the blame. 96% of illegal drugs consumed in the United States are manufactured in Mexico. But given the reduced supply right now, it's very apparent that China also plays a big role in the manufacturing of these drugs. The Mexican drug cartels are only able to ship so much methamphetamine and fentanyl into the United States because they receive these raw materials from China. In the future, this means the United States could employ a strategy to reduce the amount of drugs coming in by putting pressure on China to no longer send these raw materials into Mexico. Like I've said many times on this channel before, the United States should really evaluate whether the economic benefits it receives from having these ports of entry with Mexico outweigh the outrageous amount of misery caused by drug addiction, caused by drug-related homicides in both the United States and Mexico. Personally, my belief is that year after year, the deaths now amounting to millions and millions of people, that it couldn't possibly be worth whatever money that U.S. corporations make off trade with Mexico. The number of people who have died both in Mexico and the United States due to drugs being smuggled through these ports of entry and over the unsecured border at this point are approaching Holocaust or Joseph Stalin style levels. Most people, for example, believe that it was wrong for Joseph Stalin to let millions of people starve to death because he was ideologically committed to the idea of communist-style collective farming. Yet in the United States and Mexico, our government has let a similar number of people die related to drug smuggling for what appears to be similar purely ideological reasons that free trade is a good thing. This should not be the case. People should be more important than ideology. No amount of money is worth it if it's going to mean the deaths of millions of people. We ought to consider closing down the ports of entry with Mexico permanently, or at the very least, even after we've dealt with the coronavirus, we should maintain reduced traffic through them to keep the supply of drugs in the United States low. Now, the other implication I wanted to talk about is that given the recent surge in drug prices, it's going to be increasingly expensive and difficult for drug addicts to maintain their habit during this crisis. Now, of course, you would hope that many drug addicts would use this opportunity as a reason to pursue sobriety at this point. But of course, not all of them are going to do that. Some of them are going to get increasingly desperate for money in order to pay for these drugs. When this is coupled with the fact that many jails and prisons are being emptied, and increasingly most big cities are no longer enforcing property crime laws, there could be a crime wave coming in the future. As I've said previously on this channel, it's important for Americans right now to be prepared to protect themselves, their property, and their family. It would be very foolish at this time to depend on the liberal state to protect yourself or your property. So I ask everyone to please be safe out there. It's unlikely I'll be releasing any new videos over the weekend, but if you check back on Monday, there should be a new video for you. If you're not subscribed to this channel and you enjoyed the video, please subscribe. Once again, stay safe, everyone.